The night was cold and restless. A storm moved slowly across the valley, and the wind pressed against the old wooden walls of the farm. The farmer, a quiet man who lived alone, sat in his small kitchen. He was used to silence, used to loneliness, but that night felt different. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the air, heavy and strange, as if the darkness itself was hiding a secret. Then it came. A sound. At first he thought it was only the wind moving the loose boards of the barn. But when he listened closer, it was not the creak of wood or the scrape of branches. It was softer, weaker, almost like a cry. He froze, his heart beat faster. No one came to his farm at night, and no animal made a sound like that. He reached for his lantern, its dim flame pushing shadows across the walls. With slow, careful steps, he opened the door and walked into the storm. The rain tapped against his hat. The wind whipped through the grass. Out in the field, the barn stood waiting, tall and dark against the lightning that split the sky. The strange sound came again, faint, trembling, almost human. The man hesitated. Every story he had heard as a child came rushing back. Warnings of spirits in the night, creatures that wandered the land when the storms were strong. But curiosity and something else deep inside him pushed him forward. The barn door groaned as he pulled it open. He lifted the lantern high, its light spreading across the dusty floor and old wooden beams. The smell of hay and damp earth filled the air. For a moment there was nothing. Just silence broken by the beating of rain on the roof. Then he saw it. At first he thought it was a child curled up near the back of the barn. But as he stepped closer, the truth struck him like a hammer. The figure on the floor was not a child, not even human. Her skin glowed faintly in the lantern's light, pale with a strange shimmer as if woven with silver. Her hair, tangled and damp, spilled across her shoulders, shining like threads of metal. And her eyes, though half closed in pain, were larger, darker, filled with a depth he had never seen before. She was injured. A thin cut ran along her arm, and dark liquid, not quite red, seeped into the straw beneath her. She shivered, weak and afraid, whispering words he could not understand. The farmer's breath caught. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to shut the door and never speak of this night again. This was impossible. This was wrong. Creatures like this belonged in stories and dreams, not in his barn. But then her eyes met his. There was no threat in them. No anger, only fear, and something else. A silent plea. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers long and delicate, and in a voice broken and soft, she spoke one word he understood. Help. The farmer stood frozen. He could hear his own heartbeat louder than the storm. He looked at her wound, at the way she struggled to breathe, and he knew one thing for certain. If he did nothing, she would die. His hands shook as he lowered the lantern and knelt beside her. She flinched at first, then stilled, watching him with wide, desperate eyes. He took a clean cloth from his pocket and pressed it gently against the cut. The strange blood stained the fabric, glowing faintly before fading. She winced but did not pull away. Outside, the storm raged harder. The wind howled, rattling the barn doors as if the night itself wanted to break in. But inside, time seemed to slow. The man did not know who she was or where she came from. He did not know why she had fallen, broken and bleeding into his quiet world. All he knew was that she needed him. He gave her water, lifting the cup carefully to her lips. She drank with difficulty, her hands trembling as she held his sleeve for balance. For a brief moment, he felt the warmth of her skin against his. It was strange, different, yet not frightening. She tried to speak again, her voice broken, but the words were lost. Still, he understood. She was asking for safety, for shelter, for life. The farmer sat back, lantern light flickering across his face. He had lived alone for years, carrying the weight of loss, carrying the silence of empty days. Now in his barn was a being from beyond anything he had ever imagined, and she was his responsibility. He looked once more at the door, at the storm outside, and then back at her. No matter who or what she was, he made his choice. He would keep her safe. He didn't know it yet, but that single act of kindness would change his destiny forever. Morning light crept across the fields, washing the land in pale gold. Birds sang in the distance, and the storm was gone. But inside the old barn, the world felt heavy, tense, and quiet. The farmer sat on a wooden crate, lantern still beside him, though it had burned low through the night. His eyes had not closed once. The girl, no, the alien, still lay on the straw, weak and silent. Her strange wound was wrapped in cloth now, and her breathing had grown steadier. But every time she shifted, every time she winced, his chest tightened. He could not believe what had happened. He rubbed his tired face and whispered to himself, "What am I doing?" He knew the answer, though. He was protecting her. For reasons he could not explain, he had chosen her fate over his own safety. If anyone learned she was here, it would not just be her life at risk. It would be his too. The barn creaked and he jumped. Every sound now felt like danger. He glanced at the door, expecting men, soldiers, or worse. But it was only the wind. Still, he could not relax. Something told him the night was only the beginning. When he turned back, her eyes were open. She stared at him, unblinking, as though trying to read his soul. Slowly, she pushed herself up on one elbow. The cloth slipped from her shoulder, and he saw again the faint shimmer of her skin, glowing like silver under the light. He held out a hand. "Careful." She tilted her head as if she understood the tone but not the words. Then she whispered in her broken voice again. He caught only one clear word: "Safe?" The farmer swallowed hard. How could he promise safety when the world outside would hunt her? Yet he nodded. Yes. Safe. Her lips curved into the smallest, faintest smile before her strength failed, and she fell back onto the hay. He left her for a moment, stepping outside into the morning air. The sky was clear now, but the fields were full of tracks, his cows restless from the storm, the soil broken by rain. And then he saw something that made his stomach twist. Not all the tracks were from cows. Boot prints, heavy, deep, leading from the road toward the forest nearby. He crouched, tracing one with his finger. Soldiers, or men with guns. Whoever they were, they had passed close, too close. He hurried back to the barn, heart pounding. She looked up at him, her dark eyes wide, sensing his fear. He whispered, "They're searching." She did not understand, but she felt the danger. She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, her fingers trembling, and again that single word left her lips sharp and desperate. "Help." The farmer nodded. There was no turning back now. He pulled old blankets from a chest and covered her, hiding the glow of her skin. Then he dragged bales of hay, stacking them to block her from sight. The barn filled with dust and the smell of straw stung his nose, but he kept working. When he finished, she was hidden deep, her breathing muffled beneath layers of wood and hay. Only her eyes were visible through a crack. She watched him, trusting him completely. That trust cut deep into his heart. The day dragged on. He worked the fields as if nothing was different, but every sound made him look over his shoulder. Horses clattered down the road, men shouting in voices too sharp to be neighbors. He saw smoke rise far in the distance, machines perhaps, or camps he did not know. By evening, his nerves were raw. He returned to the barn, shutting the doors tightly. When he pulled the hay aside, she was still there, breathing softly. She looked at him with tired relief, as though he was the only light she had left. He brought her bread, though he doubted she could eat much. She touched it carefully, studied it, then tasted. A small laugh escaped her, strange but warm, as though the taste of something simple gave her joy. For the first time, the farmer smiled back. They sat in silence, two strangers from worlds apart yet bound by the same fear. He wanted to ask questions, where she came from, why she was here, what hunted her. But he held them back. She was too weak. And perhaps deep down he was afraid of the answers. That night, as the lantern burned low again, she surprised him. She pointed at herself and spoke a soft word. It sounded like a name, though he could not repeat it. Then she pointed at him, waiting. He hesitated. Then he said his name aloud. Her lips shaped it slowly, almost correctly, and for a moment he forgot the danger outside. But the peace did not last. Near midnight he heard it again, the hum of engines in the distance. Strange lights flashed against the clouds, moving low across the horizon. His blood ran cold. They were searching and they were close. He hurried back to her hiding place, whispering fast, "Stay quiet. Don't move." She nodded, eyes wide with fear. The sound grew louder, rattling the barn roof. He pressed his back against the door, every muscle tense, praying they would pass. His lantern flickered and the world seemed to hold its breath. At last, the sound drifted away, fading into the night. He sank down, trembling, his heart still racing. The alien girl crawled out from under the hay, her face pale but calm. She touched his arm gently, as if to tell him she trusted him more than ever. The farmer looked at her, knowing one truth. This secret was no longer just hers. It was his, too, and secrets like this could never stay hidden forever. The next morning came with silence. Too much silence. The farmer woke to the sound of his own heartbeat, not the normal songs of birds or the moo of cattle. The air itself felt heavy, as if the land was holding its breath. He stepped outside with his hat pulled low, scanning the horizon. The sky was clear, but the world did not feel safe. Then he saw them. Across the far edge of the field, near the line of trees, strange shapes moved. At first he thought they were men, but as he narrowed his eyes, he realized they were not men at all. Tall figures in dark armor, their bodies glowing faintly with lights that pulsed like fireflies. They moved with sharp, controlled steps, searching the ground as if following invisible tracks. His stomach dropped. They were here. Whoever hunted the girl had found his land. He turned quickly back to the barn, heart pounding. Inside, she sat against the wall, wrapped in the old blanket he had given her. Her large dark eyes lifted the moment he entered. She knew. Somehow she felt the danger before he even spoke. "They're here," he whispered. Her breath caught. Her hands gripped the blanket tight. She tried to rise, but her legs trembled too much. She shook her head, speaking in her strange, broken tongue. He could not understand the words, but he knew their meaning. "We must hide." He pulled open the cellar door in the corner of the barn, a place where he stored old tools and jars. Dust rose into the air as he dragged it wider. He motioned for her to crawl inside. She hesitated, fear flashing in her eyes, but when the strange humming of engines echoed from the trees, she obeyed. She slipped down into the dark cellar, her skin glowing faintly in the shadows. He pulled the door shut and covered it with hay, pressing the bales until nothing looked disturbed. The barn smelled of straw, old wood, and the faint metallic scent of her blood still soaked in the floorboards. He tried to hide that too, tossing more hay across the stains, praying they would not notice. The sound grew louder. Boots crunched against the soil outside. Then, silence. He stood frozen, shotgun in hand, though he knew it was useless against creatures like these. The barn door rattled once. Then it opened. Light spilled inside, not lantern light, not sunlight, but a sharp blue glow that burned his eyes. The figures stepped in, tall and menacing, their armor humming with energy. Their faces were hidden behind smooth black masks, but their movements were precise, practiced like predators. One walked to the stalls, scanning with a device that hummed. Another bent to the floor, touching the faint stain of strange blood. The device lit up. The farmer's breath stopped. One of the soldiers turned its head toward him. A voice, cold and mechanical, hissed in a language he did not know. Another raised a hand, pointing at him. "What do you want?" he said, his voice shaking. He held the shotgun tight, though his palms were slick with sweat. They stepped closer. The tallest one tilted its head, then spoke in broken, strange English. "Where is she?" The farmer's heart hammered. He shook his head. "No one's here. You've got the wrong place." The soldier moved closer, towering over him. The blue glow of its armor reflected in his eyes. It raised a clawed hand, placing the tip of a sharp device against his chest. The message was clear. Answer or die. For a moment he almost gave in. Fear clawed at him, screaming to survive, to speak, to point to the cellar door. But then he saw her eyes in his memory. Eyes that had begged for help. Eyes that trusted him completely. He swallowed hard. "There's no one here." The soldier pressed the device harder against his chest. The humming grew louder, threatening. His knees shook, but he stood his ground. Then, after a long moment, the soldier lowered its hand. The others hissed in their strange language, angry, frustrated. One slammed a stall door, another struck the wall, leaving a deep burn where its weapon touched the wood. But at last they turned and marched out of the barn. The farmer fell to his knees, sweat dripping down his face. His chest heaved with relief and terror. He listened as the footsteps faded, as the engines hummed again, moving farther away into the trees. When silence returned, he rushed to the cellar. He pulled open the door and she crawled out, eyes wide, face pale. She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. She didn't need words. He could feel her gratitude, her fear, her trust. He looked at her, his voice raw. "They won't stop. They'll keep coming." She nodded, tears glistening in her strange eyes. She whispered a word he did not know, then pointed to the sky, then back to her wound. Slowly he began to understand. She was not just lost. She was hunted by an entire force that would burn the earth to find her. The farmer closed his eyes, realizing the weight of what he had done. By hiding her, he had made himself their enemy too, and enemies like these never gave up. The barn felt different after the soldiers left. The air was thick, heavy with the memory of danger. The farmer sat on a crate, shotgun leaning against the wall, his hands still trembling. He had faced death that morning and chosen silence over survival. One wrong move and they both would have been gone. The alien girl sat across from him, her knees pulled close, the blanket wrapped tightly around her. Her eyes never left him. They were wide, deep, and full of something he could not name. Fear, yes, but also trust. She had seen him stand against her hunters. She had seen him risk his life for her. He finally spoke, his voice rough. "Why are they after you?" She tilted her head as if she understood the question but struggled to answer. Her lips moved, forming sounds in her strange language. None of it made sense to him. She grew frustrated, pressing her hand against her chest, then pointing to the sky through the barn window. "Home," she whispered in broken English. The farmer leaned forward. "Home?" she nodded. Then her face darkened and her hands trembled. She touched her chest again, then made a sweeping motion with her arms as if something had been destroyed, burned away. Her eyes filled with tears. He understood only pieces, but they were enough. Her world was gone or taken. She had run, escaped, and now they were hunting her. The farmer's throat tightened. He thought of his own past, of the day he had buried his wife years ago, the silence that had followed, the endless days of work and nights of emptiness. Loss was something he knew too well. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of another person's grief, someone who had lost more than he could imagine. He stood and brought her a piece of bread, though it was small and rough. She touched it with careful fingers, studying it as if it were a treasure. When she ate, her lips curved into the faintest smile. That smile struck him harder than any storm. It was fragile, full of pain, but also hope. The days that followed moved slowly. The farmer hid her in the barn during the daylight, covering the cellar whenever soldiers patrolled near the woods. At night, he brought her food, water, and blankets. He listened to her soft attempts at words, broken but determined. She wanted to speak to him, to bridge the distance between them. One evening, as the lantern glowed between them, she pointed at herself and said a word. It was sharp, soft, and musical, like nothing he had heard before. She repeated it, pressing her hand against her chest. "Your name?" he asked. She nodded. He tried to repeat it, stumbling over the strange sounds. She laughed softly, a sound so delicate it made his heart ache. She shook her head, then tried again, slower. He tried once more, and this time she smiled in approval. Then she pointed at him. He hesitated, then spoke his name. She repeated it, almost perfect. When he nodded, she smiled wider. Something small but powerful had shifted. For the first time, they were no longer strangers. They were two people sharing names, sharing trust. But peace never lasted long. One night, as they sat together, the sound of engines returned. The barn walls shook as machines passed low over the fields. The farmer doused the lantern quickly, dragging her into the cellar. He crouched with her in the dark, his arm around her shoulders as dust fell from the rafters. She buried her face against his chest, trembling. He whispered, "Shh, quiet." They waited in silence. The hum of engines circling overhead. Lights cut across the cracks in the barn walls, sweeping like search beams. His breath caught, afraid one of the soldiers would see the faint glow of her skin through the gaps. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the sound faded again, leaving only the night. The farmer let out a long breath. She lifted her head, her eyes shining in the dark. She touched his face lightly, a gesture of thanks, of trust, deeper than words. He realized then that he was no longer protecting a stranger. She had become something more, a friend, a bond he had not felt in years. But with that bond came danger. The hunters would not stop. Each day they drew closer, their machines louder, their patrols longer. He knew he could not keep her in the barn forever. One night she pointed at the hills beyond the fields. She spoke in her broken words, but he caught the meaning. "We must go." The farmer shook his head. Too dangerous, but she gripped his hand, her eyes fierce now. She was weak, yes, but not helpless. There was strength in her gaze, a strength he had not seen before. She would not run forever. She would fight if she had to. He stared at her, torn between fear and admiration. This girl, this alien, carried the weight of survival on her shoulders. And somehow he had become part of that weight, he whispered. If we go, they'll follow. If we stay, they'll find us. She held his hand tighter. For the first time, he saw no fear in her eyes. Only trust. And in that moment, he understood. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The night was quiet. Too quiet. The farmer lay awake in his small bed, staring at the wooden ceiling. Every creak of the house made him jump. Every rustle of wind through the grass outside sounded like footsteps. He could not sleep, not with her in the barn, not with hunters prowling the woods. Then it came. A low hum rolled across the fields, deeper than thunder. The window shook. The farmer bolted upright, heart pounding. He ran to the door and flung it open. Out in the distance, the horizon glowed faint blue. Strange lights moved across the sky, sliding low, searching. They had returned. He grabbed his lantern and shotgun and sprinted toward the barn. His boots hit the wet earth hard, splashing through puddles left from the last storm. The glow grew brighter behind him, the hum louder. They were coming fast. He burst into the barn. She was already awake, her wide eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She rose unsteadily, clutching the blanket to her chest. She did not need to ask. She knew. They're here, he whispered. She nodded once, her face pale. He pulled open the cellar, but before she could climb in, the barn shook violently. A beam of blue light cut through the wooden walls, searing a hole in the boards. The smell of smoke filled the air. They had found them. The farmer grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the back. Run! The barn doors exploded inward, shards of wood flying like knives. Tall armored figures stormed inside, their weapons glowing, their movements sharp and merciless. Their masks reflected the lantern light, cold and unfeeling. The farmer raised his shotgun. His hands shook, but he fired. The blast thundered in the small space, smoke filling the air. One soldier staggered back, armor scorched, but it did not fall. It turned its head slowly toward him, as if the shot had been nothing more than a sting. Go, he shouted at her. She hesitated, eyes locked on him, but then more soldiers poured through the broken doors. She turned and darted behind the stalls, her blanket falling away, her shimmering skin glowing faintly in the dark. The farmer fired again, the sound deafening. He struck another soldier, forcing it back a step. But their weapons hissed, glowing brighter, and in an instant beams of blue light tore through the wooden walls. The air sizzled with heat, hay bursting into flames. The farmer stumbled back, sweat dripping down his face. He reloaded with trembling hands, but before he could fire again, one of the soldiers struck him. The weapon slammed into his chest like a hammer. He crashed against the barn wall, the shotgun clattering to the ground. Pain ripped through him, his breath stolen. He looked up, dazed, as the soldier raised its glowing blade, ready to finish him. And then it happened. The alien girl stepped from the shadows. Her eyes burned with light, her skin glowing brighter than before. She raised her hand, and the air itself seemed to crackle. A wave of energy burst from her palm, invisible yet powerful, slamming into the soldiers. They were thrown backward, armor sparking, weapons hissing as they hit the ground. The barn shook with the force. Hay scattered, fire dimmed, and for a moment there was silence. The farmer stared, stunned. She stood tall now, no longer weak and broken. Power radiated from her, wild and dangerous, yet controlled by sheer will. She breathed hard, trembling from the effort, but her eyes never wavered. The soldiers rose slowly, cautious now. One hissed in its strange language, retreating toward the door. Another dragged its fallen comrade. Within seconds they withdrew, vanishing into the night with the sound of engines roaring above. The barn was left broken, half-burned, smoke curling from the rafters. The farmer coughed, pulling himself to his feet. His chest ached with pain, but his eyes never left her. She looked at him, her glow fading, her shoulders trembling. She stumbled once, nearly falling, but he caught her. She leaned against him, exhausted, her strength gone as quickly as it had come. You, he whispered, still in shock. What are you? She shook her head weakly, whispering words he could not understand. But her eyes told him everything. She was not a soldier. She was not a monster. She was something more, something powerful, something hunted, something fragile. He guided her out of the smoke into the cool night air. The fields glowed faintly under the stars, calm again, as if the attack had never happened. But the truth was clear. They had fought back the hunters once. They would return. And next time they would not stop. The farmer looked down at her, lying weak in his arms. He had a choice to make: stay and die or leave everything behind. Her lips moved, her voice broken but clear enough for him to understand one word: together. He closed his eyes. The barn was gone, his land no longer safe. His quiet life was finished, and yet, for the first time in years, he did not feel alone. The barn smoldered through the night, smoke rising into the sky like a signal fire. The farmer stood in the doorway, staring at the broken beams and scattered hay. His home, the only place he had ever known, was no longer safe. The hunters had found him. They would come again. Next time, they would not leave until both he and the alien girl were gone. Behind him, she sat on a crate, wrapped once more in the old blanket. Her glow had faded, but the memory of her power lingered in his mind. He had seen her strike down soldiers with nothing more than her hands, seen light burn from her body like lightning. She was strong, yes, but fragile too. The effort had drained her, left her trembling and pale. He turned to her. "We can't stay here." She looked at him, eyes tired but alert. She nodded slowly as if she had already known this truth. She spoke a few words in her broken tongue, pointing toward the hills beyond the farm. Her meaning was clear enough. They needed to leave. The farmer sighed, running a hand over his face. Leaving meant abandoning everything: the land, the house, the memories of his wife buried beneath the oak tree. But if he stayed, he would be burying himself. And her. She stood on shaky legs, her blanket slipping, revealing the faint shimmer of her skin in the lantern light. She stepped closer and touched his chest with her hand. Her voice trembled, but she spoke one clear word she had learned from him: together. His throat tightened. For years he had lived in silence, alone with his grief. Now, in the middle of danger, with death pressing at their heels, he was no longer alone. The thought both frightened and strengthened him. That night he packed quickly. He filled a sack with bread, dried meat, and water. He grabbed matches, rope, and a small knife. His shotgun hung over his shoulder, though he knew it was nearly useless against armored soldiers. Still, it gave him courage. She watched him with curious eyes, studying each object he carried. When he held out the blanket for her, she shook her head and instead pulled on an old coat he found in the house. It was far too large, the sleeves hanging past her hands, but it helped hide her glow. They left before dawn, moving quietly through the fields. The air was cold, the grass wet with dew. He led the way, every step heavy with caution. She followed close behind, her bare feet silent on the earth. The forest loomed ahead, dark and thick. It was the only place they could hide now, a maze of trees and shadows that might keep the hunters from finding them quickly. But it was also dangerous, full of paths he barely remembered from childhood. As they entered the woods, the farmer glanced back at the smoldering barn. A piece of his life was ending, burning behind him. He swallowed hard and turned away. Hours passed. They walked in silence, broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath his boots. Every now and then she touched his arm, pointing toward strange signs he would have missed: broken branches, marks in the dirt. She was guiding him as much as he was guiding her. By midday they found a stream. They drank, washed their faces, and rested. She sat on a rock, staring at the water. Her reflection shimmered back at her, almost too strange to belong in this world. Her eyes were heavy with sadness. He sat beside her. "You miss home," he said softly, though he knew she could not understand all the words. She turned to him, then pointed at the sky. A single tear slid down her cheek. He wanted to promise her safety, to tell her everything would be fine. But he could not. The truth was too heavy. The hunters would not stop. Even here in the forest he could feel them, watching, waiting. That night they made camp in the ruins of an old mine shaft. The air smelled of damp stone, the ground cold, but it was hidden. He built a small fire, shielding it with rocks. She sat across from him, the flames reflecting in her eyes. For the first time, she spoke more than a single word. Her voice was soft, halting, but determined. She told him something in her language, gestures helping where words failed. He understood only fragments: war, escape, family lost. She was not just running from soldiers, she was the last of something, maybe even the last of her kind. The farmer felt a chill deeper than the night air. Protecting her was no longer just about survival. It was about something larger, something he could not yet name. She leaned closer, her small hand brushing his. "Safe?" she asked, voice trembling. He looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, and forced a nod. Safe. But even as he said it, the sound of engines rumbled faintly in the distance. The glow of blue lights flickered between the trees, far away but moving closer. The hunters were not giving up. They never would. He gripped his shotgun tighter, his jaw set. They would have to keep moving. They would have to fight. He had made his choice and there was no turning back. He glanced at her and she met his eyes with quiet strength. Together. Always together. And in the shadows of the forest, with danger closing in, he realized this was no longer just her fight. It was his too. The forest was dark and endless. For days, the farmer and the alien girl moved through the trees, always listening, always hiding. The hunters never stopped. Their machines hovered above the canopy, their blue light sweeping the ground, their voices hissing in strange tongues. The farmer's body ached with exhaustion, but he pressed on. Each step was heavier than the last, yet when he looked back and saw her following, he found strength. She was weaker now, her skin pale, her glow faint. But her eyes still held fire. She would not give up, and neither would he. One night they stumbled upon the entrance to the old mine tunnels, long abandoned and half buried by earth. The farmer remembered them from his youth, when men had dug deep for coal and stone. Now they were only black holes in the ground. But they could be shelter. They could be hope. This way, he whispered, guiding her inside. The tunnels were damp and cold, dripping with water from above. Their footsteps echoed softly as they moved deeper. Darkness swallowed them, but the faint glow of her skin lit the walls. For once, her difference was a blessing. They rested in the hollow of a collapsed shaft. The farmer sat against the wall, shotgun across his lap. She curled beside him, her head resting against his shoulder. For a moment in the silence, it almost felt safe. But safety was only an illusion. The sound came first, a low hum, echoing through the stone. The farmer's heart sank. Engines. The hunters had found them. He stood quickly, shaking her awake. They're here. Her eyes widened. She rose, swaying on her feet, but determination lit her face. She pointed deeper into the tunnels. He nodded, taking her hand, and they ran. The mine twisted and turned, the walls closing in. Shadows danced as strange lights pierced the darkness behind them. The hunters were close. Their footsteps clanged against the stone, their voices sharp and cold. At last, they reached a cavern where the tunnel split into two paths. The farmer stopped, breathless. He knew the tunnels were a maze. One path led to the hills, the other deeper underground. He had no time to choose. The alien girl turned to him, her hand gripping his tightly. Her lips moved, speaking words in her language he could not understand. But her eyes told him everything. This was the end. He shook his head. No, we can make it. She touched his face, her fingers warm despite her trembling. She whispered a single word in English, her voice soft but steady. Destiny. Then the hunters came. They poured into the cavern, their armor glowing blue in the dark, their weapons raised. The farmer raised his shotgun and fired, the blast echoing like thunder. One soldier staggered back, sparks flying. But more came forward, their weapons crackling. The alien girl stepped in front of him. Her body began to glow brighter, light spilling from her skin like fire. Her hair lifted as if pulled by invisible winds, her eyes burning with fierce energy. No! The farmer shouted, trying to pull her back. But she shook her head. This was her choice. She raised both hands and the cavern erupted with light. The energy burst out in a wave, slamming into the hunters. The air shook, the walls trembled, rocks crashing from above. Soldiers flew backward, their weapons shattering, their armor splitting with sparks. The tunnel roared with power, filling every shadow with blazing light. The farmer shielded his eyes, falling to his knees. He could feel the heat, the force, the raw strength tearing through the cavern. And then, silence. When he looked up, the hunters were gone, their bodies scattered and broken. The light faded, leaving only smoke and dust. The cavern dripped with water again, quiet and still. But she was on the ground. Her glow was dim, her breathing shallow. She looked up at him with weak eyes, a faint smile on her lips. He rushed to her side, lifting her gently into his arms. You saved us, he whispered, his voice breaking. Her hand touched his cheek, trembling. Together, she breathed. Tears burned his eyes. He held her close, rocking her like something precious. He didn't know if she would live, if her strength would return. But he knew one truth. She had chosen to fight not just for herself, but for him. He carried her out of the tunnels as the dawn broke over the hills. The sky glowed red and gold, the first light of a new day. He stopped on the ridge, looking back at the smoke rising from the forest, then forward to the horizon. His life was no longer his own. The quiet farmer who once lived in silence was gone. In his place stood a man with a purpose, bound to a girl from the stars. One act of kindness had changed everything, and somewhere in the vast sky above, destiny was watching.